Luke, the book of Luke. If you're new to the Bible and you have no idea who this Luke guy is, I love that you're here. So don't be embarrassed that you don't know where that is. Hopefully you're sitting beside someone. Someone find it in the blue Bibles and give me a page number, would you? We'll help everyone get there. I want you to read this story with me. Okay? Luke chapter 7 is where we'll be in just a moment. Luke chapter 7. 1604 is in the blue Bible, all right? 1604 in the blue Bible. If you have that, turn there. We'll be reading from that in just a moment. Don't you hate regrets? You know, you do something, it's kind of like as soon as you finish doing it, you thought, oh, I'm going to regret that, right? Maybe it was that extra piece of chocolate cake. Maybe it was, I don't know, different things. Maybe it's something you said. Those words have a way of escaping your mouth, and you wish you could just kind of grab them in air and put them back in. But I'm going to regret having said that or doing something. And, they say confession is good for the soul. I'm going to confess something that I did that I regretted. And maybe you're saying, oh, welcome to my world, right? It happens all the time. Fortunately, it wasn't one of those regrets where I needed God's mercy or grace or needed to go and apologize to someone. I've had those regrets as well. And God is so faithful in helping us and gives us a pattern in which to go and make those things right with Him and with others. But this is kind of a big deal because after this, I appreciate so many of you asked about Amy, my wife, and surgery went well Friday, and she's recouping, and we're trying to just take care of her and keep her off her feet very much, but I appreciate that. So part of the reason why I'm sharing this morning is because she's not here. And because after she finds out about what I'm going to confess, she might not kiss me for a while, okay? Now some of you are going, oh, I have some juicy stuff about the preacher. The other day I was at Savers. If you're visiting with us, Savers is kind of the local thrift store and resale shop here close by. And I was at Savers, and my son is reading a book series called 39 Clues. Maybe some of you know about that book series. So we go to Savers and we look for them, because you get them for $1.99 instead of for $15, right? And I already told you I'm a sucker for the sale. So I was in there and I was looking to see if we could find the next book in the series for him. But to walk to the book area, you have to walk through what they call the bric-a-brac area, right? The knickknacks and things like that. And so I was walking by, and there's always interesting stuff in there, It's kind of like a big garage sale, right? And so I was walking past this area of the thrift store, and I looked over and was looking, and there was kind of this flute. But it wasn't not a sideways flute, but it was, where you blow into like a recorder, right? But it was made out of bamboo, and it had some intricate carvings on it, and I just really could appreciate that, And I don't know what came over me. I think I just lost my mind, because I picked it up in the thrift store, and I thought, I want to see if this works. And so I put my mouth on it and started playing, and then I realized what I was doing. And I couldn't get my lips clean enough, fast enough, because I couldn't lick them clean because then it get on my tongue, and I couldn't wipe them with my hands because I picked it up, and there was no water fountain around, and so I had my shirt and I was trying to rub my lips, and what was I thinking? And apparently I wasn't thinking, right? I regretted that. And I thought, I don't know what it is. And I think it was because I couldn't see the consequences to my actions. All I was thinking about, oh, wow, that's so pretty. And it drew me in, kind of like the fruit, that was on the tree. It drew me in, and I touched it to my lips. And so please don't tell my wife, okay? I'm kind of fond of her kisses, and she might not kiss me for a while. Now, at some point, you can't look at me too grossed out, because you've done something similar. Don't you hate? Exact guarantee, right? And don't you hate when you're at the water fountain, you're getting a drink, and the pressure is not very strong, so you keep getting closer, and you keep getting closer, and then you actually touch the guard there with your mouth, and it kind of like your light flashes before your eyes, right? And then you see faces of every child who has ever just stuck their lips right on it and sucked it out of there like a straw, and you just think, I just kissed all of those kids who have ever done that, right? And you can't get it clean enough, and I think the problem is, again, what? You can't see. You're down there and you're too close, right? They need like a little rear view mirror right there so you can see how far your lips are from that. If we can see clearly, if we can see the consequences of our actions, if you're me, or if we can see how far away we are from danger, it changes what we would do. This morning I want to talk about what we see and what we don't see. The problem is, when we don't see clearly, then we often do the wrong things and we end up having regrets. Now the good news is we serve a God who says, you know what, I'll take that regret and I'll raise you 2 pieces of grace. I'll raise you some forgiveness, I'll raise you some mercy. If you have things in your life you don't like that you've done, we're going to be introduced to a woman here in Luke chapter 7, and she had done things that she regretted. She didn't see herself accurately the way God sees her. Others didn't see her accurately, but Jesus comes in and he sees her perfectly. And when he looks at her, he sees past whatever it is she touched with her lips, and he sees into her heart. I want you to know that that's how Jesus sees you accurately, who you really are, who he intended for you to be, and he also encourages us to see others with those same eyes. Let's begin reading Luke chapter 7, verse 36. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. We've gone through this text not too long ago, and I just want to focus on one verse down in the bottom, but I want to share a little bit if you haven't heard this story before. The Pharisees, that's basically like saying he went over to the preacher's house, okay? It was kind of he was the religious leader at the time. So this is someone who claims to know God. He claims to love God, to be obedient to God. But still, obviously, he was blind, as we'll see here in just a moment. So the Pharisee has Jesus over for dinner. I love going through stories of Jesus because when you spend time following him around and kind of just peeking into what he said and what he did and how he treated people, you end up really liking him. And I know that may sound weird. You're like, oh, to like Jesus. I never really thought of it. We're supposed to study him, we're supposed to follow him, we're supposed to obey him. But to like him. He's someone that very much, those who thought they had no hope, thought they had too many regrets, thought they had become too dirty to be washed clean, they ended up liking Jesus. And as we follow him around this morning, I hope one of the results of that is you go away thinking, wow, I never really thought, I like him. And I think he might have liked me if we have the right heart. Verse 37. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life. The phrase sinful life here is not just, okay, she's done a few things she regretted, touched the water fountain with her lips, or played the flute in savors, right? But what it means, it carries a sexual connotation. Okay, this woman may be a prostitute, we don't know that, but at least sexually loose. Okay, certainly within all the stain that carries both socially, and she was an outcast. Certainly not someone whom the Pharisee would be finding, cohorting with. So this woman who had lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. Let me pause. I had planned on sharing this. I'll be real honest. Don't you get surprised whenever you read through Scripture and you're like, who put that in there? I've read that 100 times and I never saw that. There's something powerful about the Word. It's just there. And I've talked about this recently with someone here in our church, and we were just even exchanging some text messages about this. I haven't come prepared to share, but I'm real moved to share about that. But when you talk about an alabaster jar in their culture, what that was is when you were very young. My daughter's 13, so it would have been when she was 13 years ago. If we lived back at that time, we would be preparing her for marriage already. Because especially at that time, without a man in your life, a woman was helpless. If there was no husband, if there was no son. And so what we would be doing, we'd be preparing, basically this was the price that we would offer the groom. The groom's family would offer me some cows, and we would give them some oil, And so we would have an alabaster jar. We would begin putting oil into it. Over time, we would put spices in there. And as we could afford it, these are quite expensive spices. And so we would, as we could, we have a little extra money. We'd go to the market, we'd buy spices, we'd put in there, we'd close it back. We just, for years, we would just let that be in there, and eventually that would become like a perfume. And what is that's doing is pointing her toward that at some point she would go to her future husband and she would break this jar open. And this is like a piggy bank. This isn't, if you were growing up, you had two kinds of piggy banks, and it made two kinds of people, savers and spenders. Okay? Because you had the one piggy bank that had the trap door at the bottom. You know, so you put money in, but oh, you really see something you like, you just flipped it open, unscrewed it, and got some money out, right? But then you had the piggy bank that had there was an entrance, but there was no exit. And to get to the money, you had to break it open. That's what the alabaster jar was as well. That once finally they would get the spices into the alabaster jar and they would seal it because, okay, we've got all the spices we need. It just needs to kind of ferment there and soak up and become this beautiful aroma. So at some point our daughter can have the dignity of going to her future husband. And she would kneel down at his feet and she would break the jar and she would anoint his feet saying, I intend to give myself fully to you. My heart, my body, my emotions, my dreams. And this alabaster jar and the contents of this jar would signify that. So when this sinful woman comes in with her alabaster jar, I wonder how much she had to dig to find the alabaster jar. Because I'm guessing, living the life that she had lived, they had long ago taken that jar and said, you know what, we're not going to need this, obviously, because this is for dignified weddings, this is for dignified relationships, and all the hopes that we had poured into this bottle for our daughter, obviously she's not going to live up to that, so we'll just put that away. In fact, it was just kind of an embarrassment. It was just kind of a shameful reminder to us every time we saw that this alabaster jar and of the lifestyle that our daughter is living. So when she comes with this alabaster jar, let's keep reading in 38. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. So in a lot of ways what she's saying is, I'm coming to give myself to you. And I'm breaking all that I have, everything that's valuable for me, I'm pouring out here at your feet. So you can see why the Pharisee would kind of have a raised eyebrow about this, the kind of woman she is and what she had done. Verse 39, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, like he claims to be, like people think he might be, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii. This is about 2 years' salary, okay? And the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now which one of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. In verse 44, this is the verse I want us to hear this morning. Then Jesus turned toward the woman and said to Simon, I know I've brought that out before, but it's so interesting that he's looking at one person but speaking to another. And so what's happening is Jesus is looking at the woman and he takes Simon's gaze and says, look at this woman, do you see her? They were both looking at the same heart, at the same person, but they saw radically different visions. Simon, do you see her or just her sin? Do you see her or just her regrets? Do you see her or just her reputation? Do you see her? I hope you'll spend time reading the rest of that story later today. Excuse me. One of my favorite lines, there's so many good ones, but he says, do you see this woman? When others look at you, I want to ask 3 questions. Do we see? And what do we see? Do we see through Jesus' eyes? The first question, when others look at you, what do they see? When others look at you, what do they see? You know, there's the stream that's just right down the street. If you go up and go over the bridge, and I run over that most days. And the other day I was running a little bit later than I usually do, and I looked off to the left like I always do, looked down in the stream. And to say that the stream is not pristine and beautiful would be an understatement. The pollution, you read about it in the paper, where raw sewage sometimes gets into there. Sometimes I see people fishing in there, and I think, you're going to actually eat something that came out of that water. I expect to come out with like 5 eyes and stuff like that. But one morning it was a little bit later, the sun was a little bit higher, and there's something about the reflection of how the sun reflected off the water. It didn't allow me to see down into the dirt, and when it rains, it's almost a chocolate milk brown. But instead, the way the light was hitting it, I couldn't see through the surface. All I could see was like a mirror, and it was reflecting. As I looked, it was this beautiful picture of a beautiful blue sky, these white cotton clouds reflected in the mirror of the water, and these majestic trees swaying in the trade wind breeze. That when the sun of God reflects off of us, we no longer see the ugliness in us, but we see the beauty as we reflect God. When others look at you, what do they see? Second question, when you look at others, what do you see? I know it's been several years ago now. Do you remember Susan Boyle? Britain's Got Talent. And she came out and she was an unemployed church secretary of almost 48 years old. By any popular standards, was way past time for her to be breaking out into the music scene. And she came out and she's, kind of frumpy in her dress and kind of awkward in her, stage presence. And the audience is kind of laughing. Oh boy, we're going to get to hear something interesting here. But then when she put the microphone to her mouth and she sang. And since then, she has her third CD out now. And she has some gospel songs that are there. She's praising God. But whenever we looked at her, what did we see? It's some of what Jesus is asking in the story with the sinful woman. He's saying, what do you see, Simon? See, when Jesus looks, even in an awkward, frumpy, middle-aged woman, what he sees is an opera singer. When he looks at you, he doesn't just see the dirt. He looks beneath and he sees your talent and your beauty. The third question, when you look at yourself, what do you see? A preacher, a prostitute, going to a Burger King in Barcelona, Spain. In most places, that sounds like the beginning of a bad joke, but this morning it's the beginning of a beautiful story. A preacher told the story that he was in Barcelona, Spain, traveling, and he was going back to his hotel room, and he was walking down the main street there in Barcelona. And one of the things you have to walk past there is the street corner where there are prostitutes, maybe a woman, much like the reputation of this woman in Luke 7. And being a preacher, he walked by and of course lamented the fact, kind of went through the stages that maybe most of us would. At first thought, I can't believe they're doing that. Then he began to try to put Jesus glasses on, and he started saying, how sad. How do you get there? Much like this lady, you don't wake up at 12 and think, you know what I'd like to be when I grow up? Well, what happens in those lives? What tragedy happens that takes them, that still their own choices then compound that, and they find themselves that that's where they are, that they believe that all I have to offer are these parts of my body. And they've lost their true value that God created in them. And so he thought, you know what, here I am a preacher. I profess to be son of the God of our Creator. What if I went over and I asked one of these ladies to walk across the street to a Burger King and just spend some time talking? He also did think, well, what if someone from my church happens to be in Barcelona, Spain, and sees me talking to these ladies? But you understand that's no more scandalous than what Jesus is doing here in Luke chapter 7. By reaching his heart and his hands out to this woman. And that's what he does to us. The preacher ends up walking up to one of the ladies and he politely says, what do you charge for an hour of your time? So she replied back and then saying, you know what I'd like to do, I want to be clear about my intentions. What I'd like, could we just walk across the street and could we just talk for an hour? He laughs and says, her answer was, no, I don't want to listen to your problems for an hour. It was kind of a hit to his confidence. He was having to convince this prostitute to accept his money and spend some time with him. But she agreed, said, no, I just want to have a conversation with you. So they went across the street. It's one of these two-story Burger Kings. They went upstairs, and they were sitting there talking, and he purchased, the burger and fries and a drink, and they were talking. And he said, tell me about yourself. What's your story? And so she started telling her story that she was from Ghana because of struggles that were there. She talked about how she grew up and the hopes that they had for her family had for her, and that there was some bad relationships, and at some point she had to flee. And so she left and she went to Spain. But she was there illegally and she couldn't find work, of course, and so what she eventually found herself on that street corner, doing what she was doing. And she almost had lost herself in the story when she kind of caught herself, wait a minute, this is still kind of weird. And she kind of sat back and asked the preacher, what you know about me, what do you do? And the preacher said, I wasn't going to tell her I was a preacher, and I was just going to try to talk with her and just see if I could speak some value into her life. But she asked. So he took that as a providential moment and he said, well, I'm a preacher. Of course, that turns the conversation, and over time, she starts to let her guard down. She says, you know what, I grew up in church. I used to sing in the choir. And she started remembering in her words to this preacher how much she loved God and how God was always there for her and how she's gotten so off track in her life. And they found out that as she sang in the choir that they knew some of the same songs. So the upstairs of this two-story Burger King, they're sitting at a table sharing maybe communion. And she starts singing some of the songs that she used to sing as a young lady in the choir of her church. You see, she could not see who she really was until someone else saw who she really was and would remind her, do you remember who you were made to be, and how far off track you've got. Before she could remember who she was, she needed someone else to see who she was. We don't know the story out of Luke chapter 7. Obviously, this woman doesn't just walk in to Jesus, a stranger. I can't help but think as all the people were listening to him, and if you look through his teachings, he went around teaching a lot. He was speaking out loud. People would gather, and he would teach. And I can't help but think that this is one of the ladies who was on the fringe. This radical Jewish teacher, but he teaches differently. See, because as a woman of her reputation, she's been spoken to by religious leaders, guaranteed. You don't belong. You're on the outside. You see how far away from you are from God. You see how displeased he is with you. Now, I'm not condoning any actions here. But Jesus came bringing what he called the good news. And he started saying crazy things like prostitutes and tax collectors are going to get in. They're further up in the line to get into the kingdom of heaven than the Pharisees. And I'm guessing she was okay, she wouldn't even have needed to be first in line. It was radical for her to hear that she was even allowed in line. But at some point, something she heard about Jesus, I think she liked him. And I think that she thought, he might like me. Not this, not what I've become, not where I've taken my life, not the pollution in my river, not the junk on my lips, the things I've touched, but I think it's like he almost sees through what everyone else sees. He sees who I really am. He sees who I've been. He sees who God created me to be. Maybe the three questions we've asked are not the most important questions. I hope that you know how God sees you. I hope that you see others through Jesus' glasses. I hope that you see yourself through Jesus' eyes. And so while there's not one or two things specifically to go and do tomorrow, come back next week. I'll give you lots of things to do again, okay? Except just to begin tuning your eyes to how God sees people and how God sees you. So maybe more important than what do others see, what do you see, maybe the question we should be asking is, what does God see when He looks at you? Now, I don't want this just to be kind of a light, feel-good, fuzzy moment. We pat each other on the back and God loves us, yay, let's, have a song. What I want is for us to come like this woman, with our reputation, with our brokenness, with the brokenness that's been done to us from life, but also with the brokenness that we've invited into our lives through poor choices. What I want us to do is to hear this final verse through the ears of a Spanish prostitute who's been reminded that she used to sing praises to God in the choir of her church. I want us to hear this final verse like a polluted stream. We're not pretending we're clean. We're not coming pretending and faking and wearing a mask. But when you come before Jesus, it's almost as if He can see our hearts, who we really are, and our true value. It's almost like He was there when we were created and remembers. What does God see? 1 John chapter 3, verse 1. I hope you'll open your hearts and your minds and receive this verse as a blessing. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. Later in the same chapter, John tells us, so act like children of God. If we're not careful, we kind of give this false sense of security for people and just say, you know what, God loves you, and then we're done. And that is so true. I want you to receive that. I want you to soak in it. I want you to marinate in it. I must be getting hungry. I want you to receive that fully, because that's where it starts. But it's out of the fullness of understanding that. Then at some point we're able to let Him help us up and dust us off and clear the pollution out of our stream and wash the sin off of our bodies and our spirits and our souls. And we start saying, if I'm a child of God, children of God don't stand on the corner and do what I'm doing. They do different things. Now notice He doesn't say, act like children of God and I'll let you in. Parents, I know you've been tempted to do this, but when your children don't act perfectly, you don't say, you know what, you're not my child anymore. As soon as you get your room clean, I'll let you be my child. We'll go back down to the courthouse, we'll sign the papers, I'll let you be legal again. What do we say? Maybe it's something similar to something I heard growing up. Oftentimes it was on Friday night, and I was a teenager, we were going out with friends, and my dad would always remind me, remember who you are. It's about identity more than about action, but we also know that because of your identity, it leads to action. A change in identity will lead to a change in your activity. And then at some point when someone says, you're a child of God, we'll go, yeah, I kind of feel like that. I'm not perfect. But every once in a while, it's like God just comes into me and He says something good out of His mouth. Every once in a while, He takes these hands that have sinned so much and He actually serves someone through them. Sometimes He takes things that I'm selfish with and He helps me give them away to bless other people. I'm kind of behaving like a child of God. It must be tough growing up as royalty. You think of England, right? We have history, of course, here in Hawaii of royalty. But as far as modern day examples, you think to England and where Susan Boyle is extra famous. And to grow up the prince or the princess, that's a lot of pressure, right? But I wonder if every time they go out, you say, you're royalty, remember to act like royalty. And that's so much who we are. Let's just remember to act in line with who God says we are. But make no mistake, if you are in Christ Jesus, you are a child of God. Be reminded of that this morning. Maybe you're His child, but you've forgotten how amazing a father-child relationship can be. This morning, be reminded, come back close to God. Maybe you're a child, but you've run away from home. Well, won't you make today the day you run back? I want you to know Satan wants you to think that, yeah, you can come back, but God's going to be sitting there with His arms crossed. And He say, oh yeah, but what do you have to offer me? Why should I forgive you? But we know from other stories that He's been looking down that road ever since you walked away. And what He knows is all you have to do is just turn around and take one step. And before your foot hits the ground, He will be grabbing His clothes up around His legs and be running towards you, welcoming you back. Maybe you've never let God adopt you. Maybe you don't feel like a child of God because in the sense of that right relationship with Him, you've never let Him adopt you. He wants to, but you've never said yes. Could we meet this week and talk about how you can say yes to God adopting you? And you can be His child, the responsibilities and blessings of being a child of God. Regardless of where you are, I want you to hear one more time. If we can pray for you, encourage you, you come to the front as we sing a song in just a moment. But I want you to see, that's how the verse begins, to see what great love the Father has lavished, poured out on, flooded you with. That you should be called the children of God. And that is what you are. Let's stand and sing.